be more clear as I talk to it. So let's just go ahead and talk about a reticle. First of all, what is a reticle? A reticle is, I will run example 4. A reticle is basically, you see this little thing moving around with my cursor?
Yep.
It's an aiming point. So if you're familiar with rifles or scopes, then you know that a reticle is the bit that's in the scope. But in a game, a reticle is any device used to point where you want to shoot, basically, or you want to aim. And so when you do a shooter, you always have to ask yourself, how am I going to do aiming? Now, one of the natural ways to do aiming with a mouse, I'll let the cat out of the bag here, is with a reticle. Because a reticle follows the mechanics of a mouse exactly. Basically, it goes wherever your cursor is. I noticed one thing. Actually, I'm going to pause this. Oh, I can't pause it. Oh, nuts. Okay, I'm going to die. I noticed something interesting about this. I need to investigate whether or not you can turn the mouse cursor off.
Oh, okay.
That's a pretty standard feature, and I had assumed the desktop turned it off by default, because you don't want your mouse cursor hanging out over the screen if you're using the mouse as an input. So now I got to go figure that out. So our mouse cursor is basically a reticle, in a sense, but if the cursor were not being rendered, we would have the question, do I wish to have a reticle as the indicator of where I'm facing, where I'm pointing, and I've just goofed something up on the desktop here, so I may need to relaunch this. Or do I want to do something with no reticle where just movement of my mouse changes the facing of my character? So you can see me moving my mouse cursor here, and as I move my mouse cursor left and right, my character rotates. But I can tell you right now, it's extremely awkward. This is why I did this exploration. So I did this piece of code, and I'll show it to you in a second, to explore how awkward using the mouse would be as a rotating input. Now, the important thing to understand about this is there's no one right way to do this. In fact, I've got 2 different ways that I'll show you to use your mouse to rotate your character. And the second one, while better, still has some issues. Let me show you the second one. So, the first one, as I said, is you move left to right, and it's literally as much as you move left to right. Let me turn off the enemies, because that's just super annoying. Oh, I'll tell you what. Let's bring up the simulator so I can make changes on the fly and show you these things. I apologize. As I bring the code over here, you can see it while I'm working on it. Basic no reticle. This create enemies is the thing we're looking for. I'm just going to comment this out so the enemies don't get generated. And let's do this on every one of these for now. Okay, all no reticles already off. And we'll comment that out over here. And let's just do it on the zombies too, so we can have this discussion without dying every 2 seconds when I can't shoot a zombie or an enemy. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going through the code and I'm turning off the initial piece of code that launches the enemy generation, because I want to have a discussion without continually dying. So now there will be no enemies. So I'm moving my cursor left and right, and as you can see, my mouse is spinning. So if I move right, it spins to the right. If I move left, it spins to the left. The problem with this is one thing that a lot of people have, especially Windows users, is they have an accelerated mouse. So Windows does this thing where you move it slowly and it turns slowly. But then if you reach a certain threshold, then it's not 1-to-1 anymore. It's like 2 times or 3 times the input. So instead of 1 pixel movement input, it's treated as 2 or 3. And it moves your cursor more quickly, because that's natural for us to get that cursor where we want it quickly. But then that also goes into our little algorithm here to do the spinning, and so it becomes completely awkward to find that exact threshold where you're like, oh, okay, this is good, I got it, and then, lost it, my guy's spinning out of control. So things you can do. You can limit the angular velocity here. So you can always say, you've spun too much, I'm not going to spin anymore. That's as fast as you can spin. You could try to do something tricky and detect that threshold. I don't know. I tried a number of things, and none of them was really that great. Let's take a look at the code real quickly. Okay, so this is in basic no reticle, which is in the ideas folder of the exploration app. And we have a variable here at the top called rot per pixel, which is rotations per pixel. What that's saying is per pixel difference, delta, x left or right, rotate by 3 degrees. So if we want to make that really super fast, make it 10, relaunch. Now it really spins, even though I'm moving very slowly. Or we can make it super slow. None of these is a great solution. So I'm going to make it 1/10 of a degree per pixel, relaunch. Now you can see I can really move my cursor, but it hardly moves at all. So that was overkill. And you can see I'm printing out the values over here in the console, so you can see how many degrees of change and what the rotation was, the delta rotation. So that wasn't really a great solution. I'm going to put it down on 1 for now and leave it there for when I check it in. But let's look at the other possibility here. The other possibility is, part of the problem with the rotating reticle is that you don't have any, the mouse cursor itself doesn't translate well to a rotating input. So what you want to do is you want to co-opt the input. You see this little yellow line? I'm going to go make it bigger so you can see it, but there's this little yellow dot and line following my mouse cursor. And what I've done basically is, let's go ahead and find that and make it longer. Last dot line, give me 2 seconds here, is stroke width, stroke, max distances. Okay. Helps if you're on the right one. Okay, so now you can see this line a little better. And as you can see, there's a line with a little dot at the end, and it's basically following my cursor around. But if you look at it very carefully, what you're going to notice is that it forms an angle. So right now it's pointing straight up, and so is my character. But then I drag to the right, it's pointing to the right, and so is my character. What I've done is I've created sort of like a temporary object. You don't even have to have a physical or a virtual representation of it. I've just done this so you can see what's going on. But what I've done is created sort of like a virtual joystick whose center is this dot I can't get close to it, the dot on the left side there. And then basically I limit how long the arm on this joystick can be and have it follow my cursor around. And what this does is this gives us a much smoother turn. So you can see how the turning is smoother already than our prior example. So here I'm turning. But if I go back to the previous one, this is like, it's just wicked out of control. I can't get it to point the direction I want at all, unless I'm really timid about the input. So this is, I need people to look at this example because this is we're not going to use it for this game, but it is a great input strategy if you really want to use a mouse for aiming, but it needs a little bit of adjustment. So what I've done here to make it visually accessible for the show is I've made this arm really super long. It's up to 50 pixels long and up to 25 pixels on its shortest. And the trick here is you don't want to let it get too short, because if it's so short that the cursor can actually travel right over the dot, then you get into this area where it changes direction very rapidly. So you want to sort of like push it around, and you never want to get right over the dot. That way the cursor doesn't change too rapidly, and at the same time you don't want the arm to be too long. Right now the arm's so long you can't see it, but I need to move my my mouse around a whole lot to make this work. In fact, I kind of lose track of what angle I'm pointing at because the distance I can move before it locks in and drags it is too far. So if I go back to my original settings, which was a minimum length of 5 pixels in the design space and a maximum distance of 10 pixels, and let's save that and reload it. Now I've got this little tiny virtual joystick following around my cursor, and my player mimics the angle of the joystick in a sense. And this becomes a much more accessible aiming device. And I think what we can do is, I want to get through the rest of the stuff, and we should come back to this in a future episode and talk about a little bit about the mechanics here, because there's some math involved and some conceptual understanding, and it's not real long but I don't want to miss the more interesting and useful discussion that will launch us onto next week's Hangout.